both of these case numbers back, I believe, in September. And we are here for sentencing today.
All right. Any witnesses or anything you want to say?
I would just call Mr. Tillman.
All right, Mr. Tillman, would you please raise your right hand to be sworn? You swear the testimony you give for this court is the truth, so help you God. All right, go ahead.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Temuchin Tillman.
Do you understand why you're here in court today?
Yes.
Do you understand the charges that were against you?
Yes.
In one case, you have been charged and you've now entered a plea of no contest to killing your father.
Yes.
Does that sound right?
Correct.
How can you describe the relationship you had with your father?
He loved me.
Did you love him?
I did.
Did you have a rocky or tumultuous relationship?
Yes, I did.
Can you expand on that?
Broken person, but he did the best he could with it.
He was a broken person?
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
You'll have to bring the microphone closer so we can.
My
I can hear.
apologies.
What do you mean by a broken person?
He had to do a lot of things in his life, and it shaped him in who he was. He was prone to be a bit abusive.
How long had you known him? Because he wasn't, well, let me back up. He wasn't your biological father, correct?
Correct.
But he adopted you at a young age? Is that right?
Correct.
How old were you when he adopted you?
I believe around 4.
Around 4 years old? And you say that he abused you when you were growing up?
Yes.
How did he abuse you?
He'd beat me. It's psychological, mental.
Psychological how?
Well, if I would forget anything coming home, had any of the chores in the morning, he'd whip me when I got home until I could figure out what I had forgotten. And he was certain that was going to help overcome me forgetting stuff.
By beating?
Correct.
Did you live on a farm?
Yes, I did.
How many siblings do you have?
I've got 3.
How old are they compared to you?
2 are younger, 1 is older.
How old are you, Mr. Tillman?
I am 50 years old.
You're 50 years old. The night that this happened, did you or anybody else try to render aid to your father?
Yes.
How did that happen? What can you tell us about that?
We tried to call 911 to get him out there.
Do you live in a rural area?
Correct.
So after that, you called 911. What happened after you called 911?
We were certain they weren't going to come, so I remember we had a wheelchair on the property. I went and got that. We tried to load him up in the van to get him to the hospital.
How would you describe what you were feeling or going through when this incident happened?
I was crushed.
How were you crushed?
For me, everything at that moment stopped.
What led up to it?
A lot.
Well, can you give us any examples?
Well, I had been through a lot in the last week and hadn't really slept in the last couple of days prior to that.
Do you live
And-
on your parents' property?
I lived with my grandmother's property at the time.
Is that property near your parents' property?
Yes, it is.
How close to it? How close is your residence to your parents' residence?
We were living pretty close, within 100 yards, I guess, at that point.
It was one big piece of property, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Over in the Auburn area, correct?
Over, yeah,
And you said you lived with your grandmother.
correct.
Was she? How would you describe your relationship with your grandmother?
It was good.
What about your mother?
It was hit and miss.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that, as her problems, she decided,
What about the other case? Did everybody know about it?
over time, yeah.
Was anybody else in your family present when that incident took place? Immediately after it happened?
Yes.
Who?
My mom.
What happened?
It was decided that it was just, keep distance, and there was nothing really to worry about, but didn't want to start any problems, didn't want to bring any problems up.
You said it was decided by whom?
I believe my mom, my grandmother, I'm not sure who else was involved in that.
So the family decided to sweep that under the rug,
Say that.
or at least not address it anymore.
Correct.
You understand that under that charge, you could face a potential life sentence.
Correct.
Going back again to the incident with your father, did you try to drive him to the hospital?
My mom did the driving. I was trying to hold him and keep him safe back there.
What information that we haven't covered do you think the court needs to know?
I think, simply put, anyone who has a complaint against me, I've been called to pay it, and I'll pay it in half again. And that's my stance on this.
We also talked earlier about, with one of the charges, with that L&L molestation charge, you're facing a 25-year minimum mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
Are you willing to pay it?
If people feel I should be paying that, I'll be paying that.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
No, that would be it.
Those are my questions, Judge.
State.
Mr. Tillman, when you were living with your parents, were you working?
I was working the farm, and then for a time I was working at the Bay State Cable Ties.
Both of these case numbers back, I believe, in September, and we are here for sentencing today.
All right. Any witnesses or anything you want to say?
Judge, I would just call Mr. Tillman.
My question was, were you working at the time of this incident with your father?
Yes, I was working the farm.
And at the time you went to go live with your parents, isn't it true you were a convicted sex offender already?
Yes, I was.
Was that the reason why you were living with your parents?
I'm certain partially it was.
That's all I have for you.
Anything further?
I have no further witnesses, Judge.
The state would call Benny Tillman, and the state has argument after that.
Betty? All right, she can testify from right there. All right, Ms. Tillman, it's Betty Tillman, is that right?
Betty Ann Tillman, yes.
Okay, thank you, go ahead.
First of all, I want to tell you what we lost that night.
Sorry to interrupt, Judge. Did the court want to swear her in?
I don't think we need to, but
First of all, okay, I met Leon Tillman for the first time in Fairbanks, Alaska, the day after Christmas in 1975. We were both native Floridians, a long way from home, so we had that in common. Within 3 days, we both realized that we had found the person we wanted to spend the rest of our life with. 2 weeks later, we said our I do's in front of the Justice of Peace, and we never regretted our choice for over the next 45 years. Leon was old school. He believed a man's word was his bond, respect for the elders, love for the family, loyalty to friends, and gave help when called on, and thankful for all God had provided him. Leon was open, likable, making friends who all met him. He believed in hard work, starting on a power line crew at 16 with his dad, and worked heavy construction until he retired. When I decided to finish college, he encouraged me and supported my goals by picking up the household chores and keeping up with our 3 sons while I took classes and stayed late in the labs. He was always my champion. Leon was a man of many talents and interests. He earned his pilot's license in spite of being one-eyed. He built wagons and carriages, drove horses as well as rode them. We traveled many places over the years for work and for pleasure. One of my fondest memories is the way he would sing to us on long road trips. We looked forward to even further travels once I retired. Leon was a family man, and he loved spending time with our children and grandchildren. He would play the guitar and sing for them, cowboy songs and even silly songs. They went fishing and camping together, and we sat each of our grandchildren on horseback as soon as they could walk. One Christmas, he made swords and shields for all of the grandkids. Other years, he made wooden cars, doll houses, and even rocking horses. As much as Leon loved the good old days and ways, he embraced the future and was fascinated by the idea of space travel. While he insisted on opening the doors for ladies and getting their chairs, he also supported women's rights to make their own paths. When my parents asked if we could help on the farm, Leon did not hesitate to give his promise, and when the time came, he moved to Laurel Hill on the family farm with my son Winston, while I stayed at my job in Jacksonville. It was difficult being apart so much, but I made the trip as often as I could, 2 or 3 times a month sometime, until COVID came along and we all worked remote. When Frank returned from Ohio, Leon was in complete agreement with me that we should provide him a place to stay on the farm and help him make a fresh start. I regret that I didn't recognize Frank's increasing belligerence. I could not believe that Frank would turn on us. Frank had such great potential and opportunities, but first he turned away from his wife and children in their new home in Ohio. And then, when he came to stay with us, he showed no interest in making a new start. We all miss Leon, his wit, his wisdom, and his love for family and friends. I feel I will never be whole again without him. As Frank's mother, I regret that he has chosen to walk this wrong path and throwing away his whole future. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Tillman. Thank you.
Is that all?
You can have a seat. Thank you. All right.
The PSI, Your Honor, that you've received describes the offense briefly and
Full ties.
My question was, were you working at the time of this incident with your father?
Yes, I was working the farm.
Gave a fine summary, but the state wants to expand on the facts a little bit based on Mr. Tillman's testimony, based on the arrest report and deposition testimony that was taken in this case. What we know is that Mr. Leon Tillman was hit in the head on December 29th, and he didn't pass away until January 1st. His family got to spend the new year of 2021 waiting for him to die rather than celebrating together. The chain of events was this. Frank Tillman was a convicted sex offender and came to live with his family after he got out of prison. They took him in and they supported him. Now, the lewd and lascivious offense did happen around approximately 2018, and because of that, Betty and Leon Tillman could not have him in the home when the grandchildren wanted to come spend time with him over the holidays. So Mr. Tillman could not stay in the house, he had to stay elsewhere. The defendant went to his brother's residence, which he didn't like. Betty Betty Tillman came to talk to him about that, and he remained upset, and she went home. Not long after, Betty Tillman received a call from the defendant saying, I need you, I effed up. Although to the probation officer he claims not to remember the incident, when Betty Tillman arrived in the living room of the home, she saw her husband, the love of her life, slumped over in his recliner with a dent in his head. He was 70 years old. And the defendant doesn't remember, but he did call 911, and he did tell his mother, I effed up. He did try to take him to the hospital, but it was too late. He'd already hit him in the head with an axe handle. Betty Tillman and Frank Tillman were intercepted by law enforcement on their way to the hospital. And law enforcement took over and investigated this case after that. On December 29th, the child victim in the Louisville Lascivious case disclosed that she'd been touched by the defendant. Now, the defendant was already a convicted sexual offender, and by this offense becomes a sexual predator. The murder victim was the child's grandfather. So we have victimization on many levels for this poor child. She has to live with the fact that Frank Tillman, her uncle, touched her, and that he also killed her grandfather. On the Louisville Lascivious charge, Frank Tillman, Temuchin Tillman, must receive at least 25 years in the Department of Corrections as the mandatory minimum and maximum of his life. That's on that charge alone. He's also a murderer. He's got a prior sex offense. He's got this sex offense on a small child. Both offenses were on small children. And he killed his dad. Nothing justifies Mr. Tillman's killing of his father in his recliner. And society cannot take any chance that Mr. Tillman is released. He's a sexual predator with 2 victims, and he is a murderer who bashed in his father's skull while he was sitting in a recliner. The state is recommending life. If the court is inclined to give Mr. Tillman less than life, he must receive at least 25 years in the Department of Corrections, be designated as a sexual predator, and be on sex offender probation for the remainder of his life with a GPS monitor. That's required by law. That's the minimum sentence on that one charge alone. That doesn't even take into account the murder. And because of his history, because of the circumstances, and because of the danger he presents to society, the state is asking for a life sentence on both counts concurrent. Thank you.
Anything further?
Thank you, Your Honor. Judge, we've heard testimony from Mr. Tillman, we've heard testimony from his mother. We're dealing with broken people. We're dealing with a family that has had many, many broken moments. Mr. Tillman, as you can see, appears to be a very broken man himself today. Mrs. Tillman being broken herself by the events, not only of these cases, but of events leading up to them. We're dealing with broken people, a tumultuous relationship that existed emotionally, physically, between Mr. Tillman and his father, between Mr. Tillman and his mother. That doesn't excuse what happened. I'm not saying it does. But it does add some context. Everybody wants to know a motive. Everybody wants to know why. And the why being that product, that brokenness. We do acknowledge that he does have a minimum mandatory on the molestation charge of 25 years. The court can't downward depart from that as much as we might grovel and ask for it. But Mr. Tillman's also 50 years old. That's effectively a life sentence already. The likelihood of him attaining 75 years of age in the next 25 years being confined, regardless of what his credit looks like, is very unlikely in a prison setting, especially considering the charge, especially considering his health and his age. I believe the last score sheet that we received before Mr. Tillman entered his plea to the bench said that he scored a presumptive minimum of 301.5 months, which is a month and a half longer than 25 years. Essentially, Judge, we are asking for the court to sentence Mr. Tillman to the least amount possible, as we would naturally. The brokenness doesn't excuse everything. It provides context. It provides an understanding as to perhaps what was going through his head, why he did what he did. That's why we're asking the court for no more than 25 years.
All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Tillman, you entered a plea, no contest plea, I believe, to
was no
these two
contest, Judge.
offenses. I don't know why you went down this road. You served 10 years in prison and another 3 years, I think, in Ohio for a sexual type battery on a child or a young minor. After that, you got out and you had every opportunity. We're given a great chance for rehabilitation by Leon and Betty Tillman. Why you went and did what you did, especially regarding this child, I don't understand. It was horrendous. In case number 21 CF 35, the second-degree murder charge is you are a judge guilty and sentenced to life in prison, and with credit for time served. In 21 CF 1266, the lewd and lascivious behavior on the child, you're sentenced to life in prison with a minimum mandatory 25 years. Concurrent with 21 CF 35, the 21 CF 1266 also would be followed by a minimum 10-year sex offender probation, followed by all statutory sex offender conditions, including no contact with minors, electronic monitoring, sex offender curfew, sex offender registration, and complete all sex offender treatment program. Judge guilty on that. So basically, concurrent life sentences on each case with a minimum mandatory 25 years on the 21 CF 1266 with credit for time served and all statutory fines and costs and PD fees. You have 30 days to file a notice of appeal on each case. Anything further?
Not from this,
I
Judge.
believe the statute requires it be lifetime probation.
Lifetime probation.
And I apologize for the state leaving this out. The victim's crime compensation asked for $495. So,
Sent to collections.
and court costs sent to collections just for.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Judge.
Do we have a score sheet?
Your Honor, the state has a score sheet, if I may approach, and I'll show it to you.
Yeah, I got the 10-year sex offender probation off the PSI, but I'm changing it to lifetime if that's what the statute requires.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I believe that concludes all my business.
Okay, thank you.
My business with the court is concluded as well. May I be excused, Your Honor?
Thank you. Okay.